are often a tell to what's really going on inside someone's mind. Even when their mouth is saying one thing, you can read what people are thinking oftentimes by their eyes and their facial expressions and their body mannerisms, even if their mouth is saying something completely the opposite. And one of the biggest tells that I found was when I did a YouTube search on the March for Australia, August 31st, probably 90% of what showed up on the search feed, right, just typing that into the search bar on YouTube, probably 90% of that was all negative, and it was both from mainstream media and independent social media people as well, some of them quite influential. And I realised something back in 2022 with COVID-19, after living through 2 years of COVID-19 at that point. Actually, I realised it earlier. I saw it as a result of my research and following what was happening throughout COVID-19, was basically that if the government was telling you one thing, then basically you should do the complete opposite at this point, because our government is so corrupt and so inured in a international, overseas, non-Australian agenda, and promoting that agenda, whether it is in the interest of the Australian people or not, that pretty much anything they tell you is actually going to be against your best interests at this point. So I've taken that as a personal maxim, basically. If the government tells you to do one thing at this point, you can pretty much safely do the opposite, and you'll be on the right side of history, so as to speak. Because they are that corrupt, mate, and they are that subverted by globalist international politics, and they are that beholden to foreign entities that they are no longer acting in the interest of the people of the Commonwealth of Australia. Right, that became so evident during COVID-19. All their responses to COVID-19 and what they tried to force upon the people of the Commonwealth of Australia throughout that period of time was absolutely horrendous, and I would say tyrannical and dictatorial, against the interests of the people, right? And I say that not just because I'm some sort of conspiracy theorist, but that was the conclusion that I came to independently by looking at the government documentation on COVID-19, both medically and legally. And I could go off on I could tell you why, but I mean, that's, I could spend the next hour talking about that stuff. But it's all there, mate, and it was all accessible to me over mainstream internet, right? On government websites, on medical association websites, on medical research websites, on law websites, in our own constitution, right, in the Constitution, Commonwealth Constitution of Australia, 1900. You get enough data and you think critically about it, and you can put the pieces together for yourself, but it requires time, and it requires effort, and it requires research. Fortunately, the internet is one of the greatest research tools that man has ever had available to him en masse. The Bible even speaks of that as prophecy of the end times. that many shall run to and fro over the face of the earth, and we've never had the ability to travel from one country to another the way we do ever in history, that we do at this point in the history of the earth. And we've never had so much access to research material, being knowledge, data, right, as what we do through the internet at this point. The governments all over the world, not just the Australian government, but governments all over the world are now trying to limit that access to knowledge and information to the average person, because they've actually seen that it is their undoing. Because you can check things, man. You can do your own research and you can check things, and if you can think critically, you can put two and two together. If you get enough pieces of the puzzle, mate, you can see what the picture is. And all of the pieces of puzzle are out there, mate. You just have to go and research and look for them. So, sorry to get off on that tangent, but the biggest tell for me, as I said, was the fact that just about everything that I was seeing on YouTube was against the March for Australia rallies. And it didn't matter whether it was coming from mainstream media or from social media and independent influencers or media people, social media people. And to me, that was a big red flag, mate, because of everything that I'd seen since COVID-19 up to this present day. And I understood that if they're telling you it's bad, chances are it's good. So I ended up going. I didn't just take that as my permission to go, or my indicator to go. I prayed about it, and the Lord showed me some other things too. And as an Aussie that is actually concerned about my country and concerned about the people, as a Christian Aussie who is actually concerned about the souls of the people in this land and the well-being of the people in this land, I know I can't do much, but whatever I can do, I try. I try to do it, man. I try to do it. And I lost a lot over COVID-19. I lost just about everything a man can lose, except my beautiful friend here, my dog. But I lost a lot trying to do what I thought was right to help the people of the Commonwealth of Australia and to stand up against what I could see was corrupt and evil and subversive and anti-Australian. You know, if we're a free country, a democratic constitutional monarchy, the things that I was seeing and have been seeing politically and socially and economically and spiritually in this land. And I say spiritually because our constitution, our federation of states as a nation to become the nation of Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia, that constitution was made under Almighty God. That is the God of the King James Bible, right? Of the English Bible, a God who is revealed, who reveals himself in the English Bible, right, to English-speaking people all over the world. And that was included in our constitution at the very beginning of it, right, that we were constituting ourselves as the Commonwealth of Australia, as the federated states, to make one nation under God Almighty and asking for his help and his blessing in that endeavour. So at that point we brought the Creator of heaven and earth and the Saviour of mankind, who sent his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, to be our Saviour to save us from sin and from death and from hell and from the judgment of God, a righteous God, against sinful men and corruption and wickedness. Right? He was good enough to do that for us. And he's the same God that we called to bear witness to our endeavour to become one nation as the Commonwealth of Australia. It was under him, and we humbly entreated him for his help and his blessing in that endeavour. So I say spiritually too, because the nation of Australia has moved away from that foundation, that godly and biblical foundation upon which we sought to constitute our nation and live together as one people in this land and on this land. So, I mean, looking at all of that, I can see that there's need for concern. There's need not just for concern, but it breaks my heart to see what's actually happening to my people and my country. To see just how far she's fallen and the state that we're all in at this point. It's really heartbreaking as a Christian and from the perspective of the Word of God. So I felt again, like I did ultimately during the COVID business and what followed it, I felt that it was my duty as a Christian to go and stand again with the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, the people of this land. So that's what I did. And I wanted to document it. I wanted to document it because of all the negative stuff that's been pumped out over the news media and over social media about it. And that's why I've opened up this page here. And this is a prime example of the sort of corrupt, lying, hypocritical gaslighting that you'll get from the leaders of our nation. You cannot trust these people. Right, so I'm making this as a preface and as an introduction to the video that I'll put up that shows what actually took place here on the 31st of August with the March for Australia in Australia's capital city. And I can assure you that it is nothing like what this lying fraud of an individual who somehow has become a leader amongst over the people of this nation, what took place here is actually completely contrary to what this person was trying to gaslight and trying to weave as an anti-Australian narrative. So I just want to read you what Tony Burke, the Minister for Home Affairs, Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Minister for Cyber Security, so basically all of the stuff that the government is using, or some of the main stuff that the government is using, policies and legislation and political agendas that the government is using to subvert this country and to further enslave and dictate to the people of this land. Minister for Arts, Leader of the House, and Anne Alley, Minister for Small Business, Minister for International Development, Minister for Multicultural Affairs. So, this is the sort of hypocrisy that you can, and gaslighting, right? This is classic Dan Andrews style gaslighting, mate. Anyone who lived through COVID-19 under Dan Andrews in Victoria who could see through the lies and the smokescreen and all the blah, 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 right, will understand what I'm talking about when I say Dan Andrews style gaslighting. Because this is just classic gaslighting, man. And this is one reason why I went and wanted to document it. Because I didn't believe that it would be what they are saying that it is here. I had more faith, both in the rightness of the cause of the people that were marching and in the people themselves, right? And when I got out there, I found that they weren't a bunch of radical, right-wing, extremist, neo-Nazi, fascist racists. They were just everyday, ordinary Aussies like you and me, mate. Just normal people, and coming out of Canberra, which was pretty amazing and the number of people that showed up, I was really surprised, actually. I can remember attending anti-COVID mandate rallies and freedom rallies in Canberra back at the beginning of 2022 and at the end of 2021, and even in Sydney toward the end of 2021, where there weren't as many people. And in fact, one rally I attended in Canberra very early in 2022, actually no, it was earlier than that. It was another one in the last quarter of 2021. There were maybe 300 people there. There was at least 10 times that number today. There are at least 3,000 people there at a rough estimate, without being extravagant in my count of in my general estimation of how many people there. That's probably a conservative estimate. There may have been more, but we'll say, there were probably 3,000 people there at least, which was a real blessing to see, because for Canberra, mate, that is a great turnout. For something that has been basically opposed by the mainstream media, by the government, and by a lot of social media influencers, supposedly independent social media influencers. So I was actually really happy to see that. And a lot of those people, it seemed to me like it was the first time they'd ever actually gotten up off their backside and marched in a rally and a public protest against something that's happening in our society, that's being forced upon us by the bad policies of a corrupt government. And at this point, a government that no longer acts in the interests of the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, but is actually beholden to foreign entities and foreign agendas. So this is what this gaslighting fraud had to say, these supposedly honourable people. Joint statement on publicised events planned for the weekend. The Albanese government stands against the events planned for the weekend. All Australians, no matter their heritage, have a right to feel safe and welcome in our country. There is no place for any type of hate in Australia. Well, the first thing that I'd like to say to that is it's a shame that they are not so adamant and have not been so adamant and vocal against the imported hatred that they've brought in here through their completely irresponsible immigration program, that even let people into this country from Islamic countries that have been known to harbour terrorist organisations and a radicalised Islamic jihadist mentality amongst the people, right? Promote that mentality amongst the people, which is a anti-Western, anti-Jewish mentality, right? As a religious ideology, as a religious core philosophy. So it's not something that's just a surface belief. This is what's drilled into them, right? Drilled into them from the time that they're yay big, mate. This is what they grow up believing. And that mentality is anti-Australian. And it is a hateful mentality. Now, as a Bible-believing Christian, I don't have that sort of hatred toward other people in my heart. And it doesn't matter where they come from. I mean, I believe that it is right to defend yourself against an attack, but I'm not going to try and go out and hurt, injure, maim, vilify, denigrate, threaten another person with another ideology or another religious belief just because they don't believe what I believe and they don't adhere to the principles that I believe to be right. Now, I'm not doing that as a Christian. But I can't say the same for radicalised Islamists. Right, I'm not saying everyone in Islam is that way, but a lot of the people that the government has let in here unvetted, right, so they haven't been properly screened before they came in. And in fact, the government and ASIO had to then backpedal last year. They had to backpedal on a lot of the people that had actually let into this country because it was exposed in Senate committee hearings and inquiry or committee hearings. It was exposed that they had actually been lax in determining whether those people were actually fit to integrate into Australian society and the Australian culture, and whether they would then become a threat to the people that were living here in Australia already because of the ideology and the philosophy which then would dictate their actions against the people in this country. Now, they've even had to do an even bigger backpedal again just recently, in that they've now had to declare the IRGC, which is inseparable from the Ayatollah regime of Iran, which is a Shia radicalised Islamic regime. Right, they've had to backpedal now even further and declare that those people are actually a terrorist organisation. So basically their whole national army of the Ayatollah regime is a terrorist organisation. And it has actually been now charged with conducting terrorist activities, violent terrorist activities here on Australian soil in this land against the people of this land, against law-abiding people that live on this land. So I'm not being racist or radical in my ideology or my viewpoints that I'm expressing here. I'm actually only reaffirming what the government has, how can I put it, has had to admit. They didn't want to admit it. They've actually tried to turn a blind eye to this whole situation for a long time, not just in the past year, but over several years at least. Their whole immigration policy has been proven to be highly irresponsible. Right, but I'm not even making it about that, because it's not necessarily even about the immigrants. It's about the people who are allowing them to come here and the premise on which they are being allowed to take up residence in Australia is completely irresponsible. And the people that are behind that are a corrupt government that is not acting in the interests of the people of the Commonwealth of Australia. And they say that no type of hate, there's no place for any type of hate in Australia, but that only seems to go one way. So they are a left-wing, woke, liberalist government. Right? They're not interested in conservatism. They're not interested in promoting righteousness and peace and order. They're interested in promoting their own agenda, which breeds the exact opposite to righteousness and peace and order and justice. So you can have people whose hearts are full of hate, who demonstrate their alignment with hateful regimes and hateful organisations, who show their absolute contempt for the country that they live in and the culture of that country when they burn the Australian flag in public. Right, that happened during the Harbour Bridge pro-Hamas protest the other week, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of Iranians in Australia who would resent the fact that those people were marching and venerating a picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini during that march, because a lot of the Iranian people, right? So I'm not talking about Aussies, man. I'm talking about Iranians who are here in this country, who escaped the Islamic regime, the Shia Islamic regime of Iran, who would actually resent the fact that that man was being venerated publicly because of what they have had to suffer at the hands of that man and his regime and the theocratic dictatorship, the Islamic dictatorship that they were forced to live under, that they were born into and lived under, and many of their family members died under for no good reason other than that the regime came after them to destroy them for some breach of one of their theocratic rules, Islamic theocratic rules, one of their Shia law rules, or Shia rules, right? Or because they were considered to be an enemy of the Islamic State, or because their conduct didn't align with what the Islamic regime thought that it should align with. Right, go and talk to some Iranian people who've had to live through that and who've escaped that. I've talked to them, man. I've met them several times. They used to protest outside the Parliament House on a regular basis. Once every couple of months, they would come, and a whole group of them would come and protest what was happening in Iran to their own people under the hands of the Ayatollah Islamic Shia regime, right? And they would bring the pictures of their dead relatives. I even spoke to one woman who was tortured, spent time in a prison in Iran, and was tortured in that prison just because she was not obeying the dictates of the Islamic regime. Right, and that wasn't an isolated story. Most of those people had either suffered similar treatment or a member of their family had suffered similar treatment or been put to death. Go and talk to them, mate. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go and find some Iranian people and talk to them what it's like to live under Shia Islamic jihadist leadership and dictatorship. It's really sad, mate. It's really sad how blind these people are, right? So it's all right. See, this is the gaslighting and hypocrisy of these people, this Tony Burke character. Right, and the fact that he is either deliberately ignorant of these things or he's deliberately trying to cover up for something that is evil and anti-human. Not just anti-Australian, but anti-human, anti-mankind, anti-truth, anti-peace, anti-righteousness, anti-justice. So we'll go on and read. And just for the record, I didn't see any hate today. Right, I was out there in the thick of it. The only hate that I actually saw, and I'll show this on the video, because I'll do a video that actually gives you some highlights from the day. I mean, if I run the whole thing, it'd be 2.5 hours or more. I think I got probably about an hour and a half's worth of footage all up. To the point where most people were leaving. I stayed there for 3 hours, and by the time I left, I was one of the last people to leave, basically. I stayed there for the whole time, and I never saw any sort of hate, right? I saw people that were upset. I saw a bit of Aussie rowdiness, but I didn't see any racial hatred at all today. Just let that sink in. And you'll see what I mean about this character gaslighting. I saw a lot of Aussies today, mate. I saw a lot of fair dinkum Aussies today who were genuinely concerned for their country and the people of their country. That's what I saw. I didn't see people that were out there that were radical people. I saw everyday, normal, average Aussies, mate, who was probably the first time they'd ever gone out and done anything like that. The majority of them, man, because half of them left way too early. Right, they all marched up and then they all marched back again. Half of them marched back again once they'd marched up to the top of the hill. It was like, yep, we've done our thing. And they didn't really understand that the longer you hold your ground, the more of a message it sends to the corporate government, right? Because it's a corporate contractual business, right? It has to do with commercial contractual law. That's how they're governing this country at this point. It all operates off consent. I talked to one young guy there, a guy called Andrew, who knew that already. And he was just an everyday, ordinary Aussie. He wasn't a freedom fighter as far as I knew. He wasn't a seasoned protester like some of the people were who've actually, there were people from the Freedom Front there today who've been holding the line against this sort of government corruption and trying to expose the level of government corruption in this country. Publicly have been holding the line since the beginning of 2022, right? You've had a group of people in the Capital Territory who've been trying to call the government to account and wake people up for what? Almost a full 3 years now. Coming up for 3 years now. Yeah, he wasn't one of those people, mate. He was just an average dude who'd been doing a bit of research for himself and was concerned about what he saw going on. And he understood that, yes, Australia is actually being dictated to by foreign, overseas, unelected corporate entities. They're actually shaping political policy here in Australia. He understood that. I didn't have to prompt him, man. He was telling me. Right, and he understood that the way that the government operates is through commercial contractual law, which turns off the consent of the people. So if the people don't give their consent, it puts a spanner in their works, mate. And by coming out publicly and showing that you do not consent to their policies and agendas, and the more of you that come and the longer you stay and show that you are not consensual to their contracts, their social and political and economic contracts that they're trying to bind you into, right? The more of a message it sends to them and the harder it makes it then for them to actually do what they're doing to you. So I encourage everyone who came today to come back and to bring some friends and stay for longer. But I believe that's why I say these people don't really even understand that level of what's happening to them in this country. They just can see that things are not right and that this government is making really bad decisions on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, and not on their behalf, because it's not what the people want. It's not what the people expect from them. It's not what the people hope for. It's not what the people really voted for. Right, and it's certainly not in the interests of the people of this land. And they saw that much, and they had enough conviction to come out and show their public disapproval of what the government is doing to this nation, and show their public concern for this whole land, not just for themselves, but for fellow Aussies, for all of us. That's what I saw today. I didn't see hate of any type, right, except maybe for a disgust in the man who calls himself our Prime Minister and presumes to lead this nation. But there was no real hate there. I was right in the thick of it, mate. I saw where the hate was coming from, and when I show you the videos, you'll actually see who the hateful people are. The contrast is black and white, chalk and cheese, mate. You can see, I don't even have to explain it. I just have to show you, and you can see. It's pretty clear, man, where the hate was coming from. And it wasn't coming from the people who were there for the March for Australia. It was coming from the people that were opposing them. That's where the hate was from, mate. And like I said, it's as plain as the nose on your face, man. I'll show you the footage, and you can make up your own mind. But just to show the sort of gaslighting that this individual, that the Australian government is trying to use to manipulate the opinion of the Australian people. Right, this is what all this is about. This is social engineering, man. This is trying to shame you the same way they did during COVID-19, trying to shame you into and trying to coerce you and manipulate you into a mindset that suits their agenda and their narrative, which is not necessarily based on the truth of what's actually happening in our land. In fact, they're trying to obfuscate and obscure the truth of what's really happening to the average everyday Aussie. What they're doing to us, not just what's happening, but what these people are responsible, the very people who are writing these words are responsible for enacting against the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, the people of this land. Quote attributable to Minister for Home Affairs Tony Burke: "There is no place in our country for people who seek to divide and undermine our social cohesion. We stand with modern Australia against these rallies. Nothing could be less Australian." That's just sheer gaslighting again. Nothing could be less Australian than a bunch of radicalised Islamist-loving people marching with flags that support known terrorist organisations a terrorist the leader of a country whose military force has now been designated a terrorist organisation, right? And the leader of a cruel and oppressive regime in a foreign country, right? Nothing could be more un-Australian, and people who openly revile the Australian culture and revile the Australian people and revile the very country that they have come to, right, to escape their own country and their own life circumstances in that country, who openly revile that. Nothing, that is un-Australian, mate. Right? Not a bunch of Aussies who are actually concerned about their country, who want to actually make their presence and their voice known and felt to the people that are leading this country down a slippery slope into the pits of hell, man. Right? This is the sort of gaslighting. Nothing could be more un-Australian than this statement right here by this person, Tony Burke. What is a modern Australian? Well, guess what? I saw lots of modern Australians today. Right? I saw young people. I saw children, families and children, young people. Right? Generation X's, modern Australians, not just people from my era. And I saw people older than me too, mate. There was everyone there, from all walks of Australian life, mate. There wasn't just one group of people there, man. There were people from every part of Australian society and culture and ideology and race too. There were brown people there, mate. Right? They weren't just white Aussies, mate. There were brown people there too. Right, so you talk about modern Australians. The modern Australians were there today, and they all had the same peaceful and concerned attitude and spirit about them. Right, they weren't there in hate, and they weren't there they weren't there for violence. They weren't there in hate. They just wanted to be heard, and they want the government to take notice and to start taking them seriously. And it seems like the government has already made up its mind, right, to say that we could be nothing less than Australian. The thing that I saw today was the most Australian thing I've seen since the freedom rallies and the convoy to Canberra. The most public display of Aussie mateship and Aussiness, right, if you want to say it that way. It was the most Australian thing I've seen for several years now. Right, so that statement there is absolutely hypocritical, lying, gaslighting rubbish. And this is the sort of people that are trying to destroy this country that have the power to do it, that we've put into a position of power to do it. Quote attributable to Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Dr. Anne Alley. Multiculturalism is an integral and valued part of our national identity. Well, like I said, we had a multicultural turnout today, mate. We stand with all Australians, no matter where they were born, against those who seek to divide us and who seek to intimidate our migrant communities. We will not be intimidated. This brand of far-right activism grounded in racism and ethnocentrism has no place in modern Australia. Right, so 3 days before the rally, this rubbish was coming out, trying to turn people away. Well, I didn't see any racism there today. I didn't hear any racism there today. And you can judge for yourself where the hate was coming from today. And you can judge for yourself the sort of people. When I put up the video that shows you who showed up today and who was there and the manner of spirit and the order in which they moved and did what they did, in order to call attention to the situation that is destroying our culture and our society here, right? You can see for yourselves what manner of people they are. I saw it with my own eyes. And all of the rubbish that has been propagated over the last couple of weeks is exactly that. Against it was just rubbish, mate. It was rubbish to try and turn as many people away from coming and standing up again for what's right. Like we stood up against what was right during COVID-19. Right, what was right and true. These people are not interested in the truth. They're just interested in gaslighting you and trying to manipulate you and try to put you down and trying to subvert you to bow down and buckle to a system and a set of policies that are actually anti-Australian, that are not in the interests of the people of this land. Not anyone, man. Right? Unbelievable what these people will come out with, the rubbish that spews out of their mouth. Well, once again, it's classic Dan Andrews style gaslighting. And it worked with the Victorians to start with. I mean, man, Dan Andrews really sucked in a lot of Victorians straight off the bat during COVID-19 because of his gaslighting and his belittling of them and his social browbeating of them. Right? They just simped to it. They just curled up and did what they were told. And look where it got them. Look at the state that Victoria is in now, and that is a direct onflow of what Dan Andrews started, not even during COVID-19, but started at the beginning of his premiership. What you see in Victoria today and in Melbourne, you can trace back to Dan Andrews, man, and his policies and the legislation that was pushed through the Victorian Parliament under his watch. And what he put his seal of approval to, and the agendas that he pushed. But yeah, the real side of that man and his absolute disgust for Australian people and the freedom of Australian people in a democratic constitutional monarchy, his absolute contempt for that was really shown during COVID-19. I mean, he put those people through hell, mate. I can't believe that they just curled up and let him do that to them. And then the people who did try to stand up, he brought the short of just getting the army out there to shoot people, he did everything he could to break any sort of opposition that dared to speak up against his absolute contempt for freedom of the individual in the state of Victoria and the basic human rights of those individuals in a democratic constitutional monarchy, right, that's based on the principles of individual freedoms and human rights under the law of the land. And what he was enacting was not the law of the land, man. Right, that was evident. It was not constitutional, and most of it was not even legislative. It was not even statutory. Right, most of it was simply regulation and policy and mandate, which if you go and look up what those things are and how they were used during COVID-19, I read 2 legal white papers on that during toward the end of 2020, toward the middle and end of 2020, right, I got that information. And they call that soft law or grey letter law, and it's not. It only has any sort of force over the people if they consent to it, because it has no statutory grounding. right? And it has no constitutional grounding. So what Dan Andrews did was technically criminal. And if not technically criminal, although I believe it was, because he used manipulation and coercion to force medical interventions on people, which according to the Australian Immunisation Handbook is actually unlawful. You can't, and illegal. You can't actually gain someone's legal informed consent if they have been manipulated or coerced into giving that consent, right? And that is in their own documentation, mate. That's in the federal government's immunisation handbook, man. So really, what was that man doing? And I mean, even not from a legal perspective, but from a moral and compassionate perspective, compassion and love towards your fellow man, right? What he did was absolutely despicable. He was the one that was despicable. He despised us, but he was despicable. And these people who've written this stuff are just as despicable against the people of the Commonwealth of Australia, of the people of this land, right? Nothing could be less Australian, than you, Tony Burke, and you, Anne Alley, and your statements. Nothing could be less Australian than you people. Because what I saw today is not what these people are saying here. And I've got the footage to prove it. Catch us later. I'll catch you in the next video when I actually put the footage up.